speaker today. I walked back there just a moment ago. He said, hey, you were introducing a young man, and I thought it was my time to go up. And Eric is a young man. He's a good man. I want you to make my friend welcome this morning, Eric Blevins, as he comes and he shares the Word of God with us today. Can you make him welcome?
Check, check. Radio check. Good copy?
Copy.
Right on. You guys are lucky. I didn't bring my, what's it called, a onesie? No. Singlet. I didn't bring my singlet. I left it at home. So, yes, here I am. I get nervous. I feel like, if you've seen the King's Speech, I feel like Colin Firth as the king who had a speech problem, and so burger. Okay.
Yeah. That's my dog.
All right. Let me pray real quick. Lord, help me speak and not choke up, that I can convey my words, and more importantly, your words. Amen. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with this. Public speaking. Usually I'm all by myself out in the woods, just yelling at myself.
Oh my God.
My name's Eric.
That's funny.
So if you were here at the last men's breakfast, Rocky asked this question: where is your true north? He had some great insight about the hazards of becoming disoriented as a pilot, which I can relate to, and relying on the compass for direction. His point was that the Bible is not true north. When used properly, the Bible points to where and whom we should look, and that making Jesus our true north is a conscious choice. He had illustrations with the magnetic compass. There's all kinds of tools available. You can draw circles with a different kind of compass. Let me grab this. There's all kinds of sayings, squares. Be there or be square. Or, let me get it down here. I've heard them all. Or there's bad sayings like, I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy.
Well.
On and on it goes. Levels, or level-headed. There's plumb bobs. Now we have all the latest greatest technology. You've got lasers. There's GPS-guided driverless mining trucks out there.
Wow.
You've got self-driving cars. At times all of this sounds plumb crazy. Maybe just keep it simple, like me. Quick little personal history. I was born and raised in New Mexico, out on one of these mesas. These were great places to explore as a kid. Let's see, here's the house I grew up in. No, that's not the house. This is in the national monument nearby. But I have been down in that hole quite a bit. I grew up exploring areas like this my entire childhood. Also 20 minutes from town, I learned to ski the old school method with rope tows and T-bars. Getting drug up the hill was at times more exciting than getting down the slopes. So the town itself is kind of strange. I fit right in. More history. During World War II, the Germans and the United States were both trying to develop nuclear weapons. We formally entered World War II after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So Los Alamos was one of the top secret sites used in the Manhattan Project to develop the first atomic bombs, further dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, in a very broad nutshell, that's how and why the town of Los Alamos was developed. I highly recommend checking out the town, the museum, the area, national monuments. There's a lot to see. Also, prior to 1957, visitors to Los Alamos had to obtain a pass 24 hours in advance to gain access into the town. In 1957, the gates were opened up. My theory is that right before I was to be born, they opened up the city gates for all my visitors. Moving along, my dad spent time in Burma in the Army. While I grew up, he worked as a mechanical engineer at the lab in Los Alamos. Not surprisingly, Los Alamos has the highest percentage of people with doctorate degrees in the nation. That's an interesting mix of brilliant minds mixed with some people that couldn't change a light bulb. As for me, I've done some plumb crazy stuff in my life. How about you?
Yeah.
So anybody know a dude that's just a little tilted? Or some chick that's just plumb crazy? I keep saying plum. The word plum to me has more of a practical, true meaning. Here's a simple tool, the plumb bob. Just like the compass, pretty basic. So a plumb line is to be referenced and built upon. Any builder, decorator, hanger of pictures, builder of walls, who doesn't reference the vertical level puts an entire project at risk. So when it comes to constructing a house, you don't want a builder who ignores the vertical plumb. So after my dad passed away, we divided up his tools. I made this on a lathe in high school metal shop in 1974. It's pretty handy. You could use a rock and a piece of string if you're in a pinch. Doesn't matter. They all point vertical and straight to the center of the earth. I certainly didn't know any spiritual significance to it. It was just a plumb bob. But as we read in the book of Ezra, God knew the purpose of the plumb line as he directed Zerubbabel in the building of the second temple walls. Thousands of years later, the massive stones above and below ground still stand plumb and true. The plumb bob seems like a trivial tool, but without it, the walls of the temple would not have stood the test of time. Zerubbabel needed this small tool to correctly finish the work God had called him to do. Flashing back again, my mother stayed at home, raised 4 kids. I'm the youngest on the bottom right, about to slay my first year cupcake. I don't remember that too well. Anyway, she was very active raising us kids. Also, she was involved in a ladies hiking group, going on long bicycle trips, active in a lot of tennis tournaments. And me, I was just an average white boy that grew up in a kind of weird, unique town. Kind of a class clown, but introverted and socially awkward at the same time. Back then, girls were a terrifying mystery. Today, women still are. Black and white TV was all we had. Who remembers watching? Everywhere. Wonderful, wonderful world of the Lawrence Welk Show. There were lots of churches in town. However, our family didn't attend church. We weren't part of the Jesus Revolution. Instead, we spent a lot of time worshiping the great outdoors. Backpacking, camping, hunting, fishing, skiing. I was 7 years old the first of many times our family hiked down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Later in life, us boys learned how to build our own boats. That's me trying out my homemade kayak in Powerline Falls. That's south of here in the Rio Grande Gorge near Taos. I wasn't much into organized sports, so during high school I joined the local explorer post. Got into heavy whitewater adventures. We had our own passenger bus and thought we were pretty cool. We ran a lot of rivers like the Rio Grande, Salmon, Snake, San Juan, Green, Colorado. A lot of the trips were overnight or multiple night runs. The longest one was 14 days down the Grand Canyon. This is about where my journey in life became somewhat out of control. My spiritual plumb bob didn't exist. So, when we ran Lava Falls in the Grand Canyon, right at the get-go, one of my oars was immediately lost. We plunged our way down the rest of the falls with one oar. Pretty ugly, but we made it. That might have been a symbolic start of the next decade of my life. When tough decisions came along, I navigated with one oar, getting by, but not moving in a good direction. During my river rat phase, I obtained a lot of practical skills, reading and navigating rivers, avoiding hazards, but not enough proper social or spiritual exposure to be well-rounded. Or maybe I was just off plump. Anybody feel it? Well,
Yeah.
off plump today.
Yeah.
Sorry. Here's another tool. It's kind of rough. Yeah, you lost it.
It's fine.
It's more modern. One time it was very useful, but got neglected along the way. You feel like this tool?
That's a good word.
Kind of beat up, bent up, not too useful, not straight, true, half a bubble off, or no bubble at all. Not worth much. I've tried using a plumb bob in Pueblo West, but there's always seems to be a big wind or a big squall coming through. That's when a nice level is better, or just shut it down and go home. Squalls. I joke around with Pastor Rob about words. Squalls is one of them. He sent me a text and said, look, squalls have been around since the 1st century. In Luke 8:22-23, it talks about when they were out on the Sea of Galilee, a squall came down on the lake, so that the boat was being swamped and they were in great danger. I turned 64 while we were in Israel last September. Best birthday present. We rode in this boat on the Sea of Galilee on a calm day, but I could see how a squall could have been rough. When I was first asked by Pastor Phil to do this, my knee-jerk reaction was, what? No way. Why not get some wise sage? Someone who's like in his 60s. I'm kind of a wise guy. Turns out I'm 64. Who knows this old song?
Birthday greetings, bottle of wine. If we be out till 2:45,
It's coming.
would you knock the door? Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64?
Well, she still needs me around, and sometimes she feeds me. She mostly needs a handyman. I've got some tools. Moving right along. Our family has attended Praise for over 20 years. Our 3 kids are all grown, married, and now live relatively close north of here. My son Ben happens to made it down. He's in the sound booth. Glad he's He was a big part in putting the new system in the main sanctuary, the company he works for. And we happen to have the new sound system and lighting system out in my trailer. We're headed to Walsenburg after this to start putting that in.
Come on.
So Juanita and I are now busy with Praise Church in Walsenburg. While Juanita is the pastor and I am the handyman dude. I make the coffee down there. And speaking of Praise Church Walsenburg, here's our group from... And my best half, Juanita, happens to be up in the sound booth helping me. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have all this visual. So in one way or another, we're all broken vessels. We've been trapped, triggered, cracked, prepared through many situations. We've all had to crawl out of holes we've created or fallen into. That's me in Alaska. Back to college, plunging into the college scene at New Mexico State in Las Cruces. I wasn't really prepared or counseled. I was in rebellion with my own irrational fears of spending my life working for the man or the system, missing out on adventure. Looking back in my small rearview mirror, there was too much social pressure mixed with pot, beer, fear of growing up, fear of females, skirting trouble, but never really getting caught, like a dog being chased around the yard. Basic math and chemistry was about all my brain could handle. I landed up, that's a Pueblo term, right? I landed up with an associate's degree in the field of water and wastewater operation and management. That's drinking water or sewage treatment, depending on what end of town you're in. That was my ticket out. I was drifting again, just with one oar. Drifting through life. Decades can fly by in the blink of an eye. So, with my little degree in hand, I wandered up to Aspen, Colorado. I started working for the city in the sewage treatment plant. I tried to just be a happy little idiot, struggling for the legal tender. But now, sewage is 99.9% water and 0.1% waste or sludge. So just like with our own lives, it can be a challenge to separate out those 0.1% toxins in our head. Let's go on. Moving right along. Still rowing with one oar. I drifted from Aspen to Gunnison. My life was still mixed up, and now I mixed it up with the party scene in Western State College. I wasn't a student, but I mixed it up. Wasted state, as we called it. More crazy times. Still swinging. My action at this phase is probably just blind persistence without much vision. I was into building things, working with my hands, seeing progress. My partying life in Gunnison led me to a guy named Keith. Together we got into searching for gold. Literally, I was struck with yellow fever. We found a big old trommel, put together a placer mining project, just like Parker Schnabel and all those other characters. But we never made it to the big time on TV. It was short-lived with personality conflicts combined with drug and alcohol-induced delusions of grandeur. Still one oar. Still swinging. So, after these hard knocks, the definition of insanity continued. You do know the definition. We headed south, literally, to Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Great name. truth or consequences. Yeah. We were working for Peter, the con man, and his mix of minions, this time way south and west of the Rio Grande. But it doesn't seem to matter what treasures lie beneath the surface. When you mix cowboys, caballeros, con men, fakes, felons, and stoners, things go south. Still going south. Anyway, we bailed before any big drama occurred, gathered more reliable intel at the local cafe. We wandered around in the dry landscape of the legendary Jornada del Muerte.
Come on.
The journey of death. We wandered through that valley of the shadow of death and eventually returned to the green high country of Gunnison. So I ended up parting ways with Keith. John, who was the more stable Christian partner, and I started regularly attending Oh Be Joyful Baptist Church in town. A great group of friends was formed through this. I remember meeting up at Spring Creek at a house for Bible studies. One of the locals you might recognize was a Christian singer, Don Francisco.
Just before the sunrise, I heard something at the wall. The gate began to rattle, a voice began to call. I hurried to the window and looked down into the street, expecting swords and torches and the sound of soldiers' feet.
So, I finally admitted I was powerless without God and was baptized in a hot tub up in Mount Crested Butte. Perhaps I regained my other orb. And I was slowly beginning to proceed in a straight path. But anyway, one step forward, two steps back, like a dog returning to his vomit. I was living in a shack with an outhouse out back, but there was no gold to be found. There's more insanity. John caught wind about some gold up in Idaho. I was still addicted to adventure, and the fever still got me. So we loaded up our rigs and headed to Idaho of all places. Idaho City, to be specific. A true little mining town with wooden boardwalks on Main Street. I didn't know it, but this area had a thriving gold rush with a lot of Chinese miners working the claims. Through blood, sweat, and tears, we extracted and sold 90 ounces in 90 days. Gold, back then, was at $3.80 an ounce, and as usual, there's always issues with personalities, percentages, guns, but that's another story. We got to be good friends with Pastor Mark and his wife Levita at the local church. When winter hit, our equipment started to freeze up. We were freezing up in our shack, and they took pity on us, and we moved right in, like two stray dogs. I was also introduced to Levita's sister, Juanita. She quickly decided she wanted nothing to do with me. Maybe she didn't like the thrift store bell-bottom corduroy pants and stringy long hair I was rocking. However, she decided I was tolerable in a limited sort of way, but didn't really latch on to my homeless lifestyle. These folks told me stories of working in logging camps for Uncle Dick up in Alaska, the last frontier. I think I started to realize why God had led me to Idaho. I dreamed about marrying this señorita Juanita, but knew I was going to have to clean up my act. Right then, I told John that I was finished searching for gold. I signed over the title to my pickup truck, all of the equipment. I drove down the hill and filed for bankruptcy in Boise. I was really starting to row my boat with different determination. So John, he has been serving God and still is kicking it at 80 years old. Come on. He's still searching for that pot of gold, but he has been in Ecuador this whole time for the last 35 years. I'm not there with him. Anyway, former astronaut Scott Kelly said, if you're doing something safe, something you already know can be done, you're wasting your time. What did I have to lose? I had nothing. 10 years had gone by, and I might have heard a starting gun go off. Run, rabbit, run. So I typed and sent up a resume and got the call to come on up to Alaska. I jammed all my remaining belongings into a duffel bag and took off into the great unknown. I had no idea what was ahead. A couple rides in a big jet got me up to Juneau, the capital of Alaska. There's no roads to Juneau. Air or sea is the only way you can get there, to the capital. Anyway, down the terminal I walked to buy a ride on a single-engine airplane. Off we went across the water to Admiralty Island. This is in a rainforest, which gets about 6 feet of moisture a year. That's why the trees are so big. I was shown a bed in one of the bunkhouses. Had dinner in the cookhouse and tried to sleep. This was a company-owned dry camp where everybody was straight and sober. That's a welcoming change. I learned fast to fit in, was able to run heavy equipment. I didn't get thrown off the island, which was pretty common. And the big turkey dinner in the cookhouse marked the end of logging for that year. I flew back down to Idaho. So the plumb bob, it hangs true no matter where it is on this earth. It points straight down to the exact center of the earth. It points straight up towards the heavens. The strongest structures stand perfectly vertical thanks to this tool. In the book of Amos, God gave Amos a vision of a plumb line. God said, I will test my people with this plumb line. For us here today, if you or I become out of line, we are in danger of collapsing. We have no right to decide where we should be placed or to have preconceived ideas as to what God is preparing us to do. God engineers everything, and wherever He places us, our one supreme goal should be to pour out our lives in wholehearted devotion to Him in that particular work. Ecclesiastes 9:10, whatever your hand finds to do it with your mind. I had abruptly exited my old life. My internal plumb bob seemed to be stabilizing. So, long story short, we got hitched up in the winter of '88. I picked the date of 1/8/88 because it sounded great. I flew back north to Cube Cove for startup. Juanita flew up shortly after. Her float plane, the weather was bad up at the runway. She landed on the water down in the cove. The ice-cold, knee-deep water she stepped into off the plane welcomed her to camp life. Thus began our marriage. Buddy, hang on. I got me a woman. This also was the beginning of my new life of being clean and sober for the last 30 plus years. Yeah! Being a cat skinner took its toll on my back. I ended up having back surgery. I transitioned to repairing heavy equipment instead of operating it. Airplanes, helicopters, boats, barges, heavy equipment, fishing, hunting. That was my idea of paradise. When I let go of the gold fever, God guided me to the greatest treasures, being Jesus, Juanita, our kids, grandkids, and friends. 7 years and 2 kids later, it was time to leave the camp life. This time, going south had a positive connotation. We left Alaska and landed up in Dallas, Oregon. We were in Oregon for 4 years. Our daughter Sarah was born there. During this time, my dad in New Mexico was suddenly diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. He was gone in 2 weeks. I watched him pass in the same hospital I was born in. Anyway, my mom was now alone in New Mexico. But God hears your heart when you speak honestly, and I said, I want to be closer to my family, and I'd like to work for a cat dealer someday. And just like that, we landed up in Pueblo. All I heard about this Pueblo was that I better keep it together or they would throw me into the state hospital. So I've tried. Juanita cried every day for a year after I drug her away from her Oregon friends and Idaho family. She didn't want to leave her friends and rainforests, but she could not deny that God was bringing us to Pueblo because every single door was wide open before we arrived. So the last 25 years is solid proof of spiritual growth and purpose for our lives. We built a house. I ended up chasing yellow iron all around this part of the state for 15 years. Most of that at the end was up in Cripple Creek, putting together big mining trucks at a real gold mine. By then I didn't really care about gold. I was more into getting paid. So for almost the last decade, I've been self-employed, monkeying around with all-terrain or spider excavators. Also, I really enjoy being involved in the wildfire culture, which is to me a good systematic process in an ever-changing, chaotic environment. When we think about our lives of faith, it can be easy to believe that a plumb line is somehow limiting or destructive. We see the presence of a standard against which we are measured as fundamentally condemning. Does God look at us with a critical eye, measuring all of our imperfections? Sadly, many people have this vision of God. What if, however, the presence of a plumb line is meant not for condemnation, but encouragement? What if, instead of declaring the ways we get it wrong, a plumb line declares God's vision for our lives? After all, we will always be out of plumb in some way. I'm out of plumb with plumbing right now. This is a fundamental part of human nature. The Bible is the plumb line for the Christian life. It declares God's loving delight for God's people and discloses the Lord's vision for the human life. Paul writes in his second letter to Timothy that all Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. So, like a plumb line, the breathed out record of God's Word is constant reference for us. I was looking for Jude. Is Jude here?
No, Jude.
I don't think he is. My friend Jude, a couple minutes breakfast ago, Jude asked me, "How much time a day are you spending studying the Word?" "Not enough," was my answer. Jude's an inspiration. So, the great prophet Amos was given a vision of a plumb line, which would become the symbol of the standard by which God's people would need to live. It represents a standard by which the faithful need to live, and a measure from which divine judgment is gauged. For me, I now think about whether my life is plumb, level, and true. Am I seeking the right standards to live by? Quick closing thought. How about you? Is your plumb line swinging? Or is it straight and true? That's all I got.
Yeah, what did you think of that? Eric, thank you for sharing that. But he asked the question, is your plumb line straight? And how many of you know life is difficult at times? The journey of life can be challenging, especially when you're trying to follow Christ. The enemy would want to put up a lot of roadblocks in our way, but how many of you know that God will make those roadblocks straight when we humble ourselves before Him? I think I would be amiss, guys, if I just said, hey, let's pack up chairs and go. But just in this closing moment, maybe you're in this place today and maybe your life is swinging like this plumb line. Maybe circumstances are out of control in your life. How many of you know in this moment that God can balance things out for you in your life? If we just surrender to Him, if we just trust Him, if we just give our hearts totally and completely to Him. I was sharing with a gentleman the other day, the Bible says that God has built eternity in the hearts of men. And there's a place in every man's heart that only God can fill. But sometimes, and I'm a man too, we try to fill it with other things. And sometimes life can get out of control. But today, this morning at this breakfast, maybe you need to recalibrate. Maybe you need to make sure that that swinging ceases as you surrender to God in this place. We're going to close with this last song. And how fitting, Kenny, this song is. Let's make this our prayer as we sing this out.